Seder night in Bergen-Belsen. Tonight we have only matzah. A few weeks before Pesach, about 70 Jews in Bergen-Belsen, the concentration camp of Bergen-Belsen. So about 70 Jews in the section for foreign nationals in Bergen-Belsen, because there were those who had a passport from certain countries were in the section for foreign nationals. So they organized into a group. Most of them were Hasidic Jews, who just came from the camp from the ghetto of Bochnia. Bochnia. Now, most of the people from the Bochnia ghetto had South American passports. Some of them had British passports, British papers from Eretz Yisroel, from Israel. So they organized a group to ask for flour to bake matzot, because Pesach was approaching. And they wrote it down in paper, their request, so they could supplicate and ask the commandant of Bergen-Belsen. And in their request, their written request, they suggested that instead of their daily ration of bread, daily bread they would receive, that they should be given flour from which the flour they would be given, they could bake matzot. And in this way, the camp commandant wouldn't worry about them taking from the camp food supply. So instead of receiving bread, they were mevater. They were willing to relent and give up on their bread, which kept them alive, so they would have flour to bake matzot. We're talking about 70 people approximately. So each of these 70 people signed the petition, and the Rebbe of Bluzhover, the Bluzhover Rebbe, Rabbi Yisroel Spira, who was in Bergen-Belsen for quite a long time, he was chosen as the spokesman for the group. So Adolf Hass, the camp commandant, he read this request, this petition signed by about approximately 70 people, and then he looked at the rabbi with contempt and ridicule. Adolf Hass said, I will send over the request, I'll forward the request to Berlin, Germany, HQ, as you know. And he said, after a long silence, and simultaneously playing with his revolver, and we will act according to their instructions. Obviously, when he was toying with his revolver, his gun, he was showing that if Berlin would issue instructions to exterminate, then. So days passed, and there was no reply from Berlin. Each passing day, the signers of this petition, of this request, of this supplication, became more depressed. Some of them were convinced that they made a grave, terrible mistake by signing the petition. Why? Because by signing this petition and asking for flour instead of bread, for matzahs to bake matzot, they separated themselves from the rest of the inmates of the Jews in Bergen-Belsen. And they signed their own death sentence by doing that, making their own selection. There were selections in the camp. By signing this gave the Germans a good reason, the Nazis a good reason to, if the response from Berlin would be so, to kill the Jews, chas v'shalom. So knowing from their past experience that the Germans, the way they set apart the Jewish holidays, the way they would relate to Jewish holidays, as we know, Yom Kippur, they would bring out a buffet to the Jews who were working and say to them, eat, and the Jews would not want to eat. They would do things that were terrible, especially on the holidays, to intimidate the Jews. So knowing from this that the Germans set apart the Jewish holidays as days of terror, torture, death. The 70 petition signers, the people who signed this petition requesting flour for baking matzahs, they were afraid that they would be the Pesach sacrifice. That they would become the Korban Pesach, so to speak. The Pesach sacrifice of Bergen-Belsen. Because of their request for flour, they were afraid. Because there was no response. Pesach was only a few days away. And there was no response. But at the height of their despair, all of hope appeared lost. Hope appeared to be forlorn. And it seemed like it was certain there was a bitter fate that was coming to them. To the signers, those who signed this petition. Suddenly, 2 tall SS Nazis came in with 2 huge dogs, and they entered the section for foreign nationals in Bergen-Belsen, that part of the camp, and they called over the Bluzhover Rebbe, Zatzal, to the camp commandant. Now, in those days, when an SS officer summons someone, it was for death. So the Bluzhover Rebbe left his friends and he began to recite the confession prayer, Vidui, Ashamnu Bagadnu. That's the prayer that one recites before leaving this world. As he walked in the direction of the commandant's office, he recited the confession prayer. Because this is what it seemed like. He was the spokesperson for the petition. He presented the petition. So he realized this is his last day. With the cap in his hand, because the Germans expected, that they should not be wearing the cap in the hand before them. So holding the cap in his hand, the Bluzhover Rebbe stood before the commandant and listened to what he had to say. This is what the commandant said. As always, Berlin, in other words, HQ of Nazi Germany, is generous with the Jews, kind with the Jews. You can bake your religious bread. You can bake your matzahs, basically. The rabbi remained standing, waiting for the horrible decree, the Gzeira, to follow commandant's statement. But to the rabbi's great amazement, the Bluzhover Rebbe, there was no decree, no Gzeira, nothing negative. To the contrary. Instead, the commandant called in a few inmates from another section in the camp who were already waiting at the office entrance, and he ordered them to help the rabbi build a small oven for baking matzahs, in the section for foreign nationals at Bergen-Belsen. The rabbi, the Bluzhover Rebbe, thanked the commandant, and he ran back to the barracks, not believing it, that he was actually given permission to bake matzahs in Bergen-Belsen. The building of the oven began with feverish haste, in other words, quickly, because the Hasidim feared that they were afraid that the camp commandant would change his mind at any minute and stop them from building the matzah oven. And in a few days before Pesach, matzahs were baked from the meager, small amount of rationed flour. The matzahs that only within name they resembled, they looked like the pre-World War II matzahs baked at home. But the Jews were besimcha, they were happy, they were thrilled with the shapeless black matzahs, especially for the children who were with them in the foreign nationals parts of the camp. There were children. So they were happy that they had these matzahs, so the children will see and learn that Pesach, a Jewish holiday, is observed, is practiced, shomrim, even in the valley of death. Pesach arrived. A seder was arranged in one of the barracks where they slept. 3 tired wooden bunk beds served as tables and as traditional seats for reclining, because you need to recline when you drink the wine. 3 precious unbroken matzahs were placed on the table in Bergen-Belsen in the barracks, and an old dented broken pot was used as the ceremonial seder plate, because you need to have a seder plate to put all the... But on it, there were nothing to put on it. There was no roasted shank bone, no egg, no charoset, no traditional greens. Only a boiled potato given by a kind old German who worked at the showers. All they had to put on the seder plate was a potato. But there was no shortage. They were not lacking bitter herbs. Maror. Mar. Bitterness was aplenty, was in abundance. The suffering of the Jews was reflected in their eyes. The Bluzhover Rebbe sat at the head of the table. The makeshift table, he sat at the head of the table. He was surrounded by a group of young children and a few adults. And the Bluzhover Rebbe began to recite the Haggadah from memory. He uncovered the matzot. He lifted up the ceremonial plate and began to tell the story of the Exodus, of leaving Egypt. Heilach ma'anya, this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in the land of Egypt. All who are hungered, let them come. All who are hungered, let them come and eat. All who are needy, let them come and celebrate Pesach. Hashta, right now we are here. Next year we'll be in the land of Israel. Now we are slaves. Next year may we be free men. The youngest of the children there in Bergen-Belsen, in the foreign nationals part of the camp, asked the 4 questions. Manishtana, a sweet, childish voice, chanting the traditional melody. Why is this night different from all other nights? Manishtana halayla hazeh mikol halilot. For on all other nights we eat neither bread or matzah, but tonight only matzah. Either bread or matzah, tonight we only eat matzah. Now, in the barracks, it was dark. The moon's silvery, pale glow was reflected and could be seen on their pale faces. It was as if all the tears, the crying that silently came down their cheeks, those there, were flowing towards a legendary angel with a huge jug of tears, and was filled to the brim. That there was no more room. All these tears with so many tears that so to speak, an angel, if you would collect the tears, it would fill the vessel, the cup. Meaning that this would signal the end of human suffering. Genigshoin. As it was customary, and as it is customary, how it's done in the Seder, the Rabbi began to explain the meaning of Pesach in response to the 4 questions. But that Seder night, we explain Pesach, Leila Seder, we explain what's going on to the children and to the adults. But that night in Bergen-Belsen, the Seder night, there was a different meaning. The Bluzhover Rebbe said, night, Laila, manishtana halayla hazeh mikol halilot. How is this night different than all the other nights? Night means exile, golus, darkness, choshech, suffering. Morning, boker, right? Means, in other words, the instead of Laila, the day, right? Morning means light, hope and redemption. Why is this night different from all of the nights? Why is this suffering, Churban Europa, destruction of Jewry, of over 6 million Jews and over 3 million children, why is this suffering different from all the previous suffering of the Jewish people? So nobody attempted even to give an answer to the Rebbe's question. Because on all other nights, we eat either bread or matzah. But tonight, only matzah. Bread is leavened, it's chametz. It's height, has height, goes up, rises. Matzah is unleavened and it's totally flat. It's not chametz, completely, totally flat. Doesn't rise. Said the Bluzhover Rebbe, during all our previous sufferings, during all the previous beforehand suffering the Jewish people had, during all our previous nights in exile, the Jews had bread and matzah. In other words, what is bread and matzah, said the Bluzhover Rebbe? There were moments where we experienced moments of bread, of creativity and light, and moments of matzah, lechem oni, the poor man's bread, suffering and despair. But tonight, the night of this terrible destruction of the Shoah, but the Shoah is not enough of a word to depict what it was. The destruction of Jewry. Tonight, the night of the destruction, in the midst of this war, we've experienced our greatest suffering, said Bluzhover Rebbe. We've reached the depths of the abyss, the nadir of humiliation. We've reached the very lowest of humiliation and the most terrible suffering. And tonight we have only matzah, we have no moments of relief, not even a moment of respite for our humiliated spirits. Not even a moment. But, he said, the Bluzhover Rebbe, do not despair, my young friends. Do not give in to despair. The Bluzhover Rebbe continued, in a forceful voice filled with faith. That's how his voice sounded. His voice was very, very special. I've heard it. For this is also the beginning of our redemption. This is also the beginning of redemption. We are slaves who served Paro in Egypt. Slaves in Hebrew are avadim. Ain, vet, daled, yud, mem sofit. The Hebrew letters of the word avadim form an acronym, Rashi Tevot, for the Hebrew phrase David ben Yishai avdecha meshichecha. David, so avadim forms an acronym, Rashi Tevot, for David, the son of Yishai, your servant, your Messiah. Therefore, even in our state of slavery, we find intimations of our eventually freedom through the coming of Mashiach. We who are witnessing, we're Eidim, he said, the Bluzhover Rebbe, are Eidim to the darkest night in history, the lowest moment of civilization, of how the Germans came to. Will also will merit and witness, aid him to the great light of the redemption of the Geulah. For before the great light, before the Geulah Shlema, for the great light, there will be a long night, Laila Aroch, as was promised by our prophets, as the Nevi'im, and stated in the Nevi'im. But it shall come to pass that at evening time there shall be light, and in the Erev there will be light. The people that walked in the darkness have seen a great light. They that dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them has the light shined. It was to us, my dear children, that our prophets have spoken, to us who dwell in the shadow of death, to us who will live to witness the great light of redemption. Dafka, from the darkest of nights, we will come to the Geulah, he said to them. The Seder concluded, somewhere above, the silvery glow of the moon was dimmed by dark clouds. The Bluzhover Rebbe kissed each child on the forehead and reassured them, and promised them, reassured them, that the darkest night of mankind, this darkest night, Bergen-Belsen, would be followed, after this will come, the brightest of all days. And as the children return to their barracks where they go to sleep, the slaves of modern Paro, then, amidst the desert of mankind, they were sure that the sounds of the Mashiach's footsteps were echoing the sounds of their own steps on the blood-soaked earth of Bergen-Belsen. Dearest friends, I merited today, Hashgacha Pratit, to meet once again a survivor of Bergen-Belsen in other camps, or in one more camp. I merited to see him today. He needs a refuah shlema. I need to remember his name is David, is his name. I don't remember his mother's name. But it's tremendously inspirational, this story. I hope you'll listen to it again and again. From this wonderful book of Yafa Eliash from the 80s that I have. And there's so many other stories of the Bluzhover Rebbe. And you can hear his voice. He was so inspirational, so powerful. And he continues to inspire till this very day. May we merit to see him and all the tzaddikim with the Geulah Mitit V'Shlema. And I also want to dedicate this, his chut, the Baba Saleh, who's it's also tonight, Bezrat Hashem, or it's tomorrow night, but it doesn't make a difference. It's Bezrat Hashem Shbili Zchutam. Geulah Shlema, Kol Tov.